The courtroom air was thick enough to choke on, but Selina Reed looked like she was breathing rarefied air. She was the mistress, the usurper, and as she locked eyes with the widow Emily Vance, she did the one thing that shattered Emily's fragile composure. She smirked. It was a smile of pure, venomous victory. Selina had the man, the money, and the entire estate. Emily had nothing but a quiet, unassuming lawyer. But what Selina didn't know was that Emily's lawyer wasn't just there to fight a will. He was there to expose a monster. The last truly happy photograph of Emily and Richard Vance was taken 6 months before his death. It was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art Gala, an event Emily herself had chaired. In the photo, Richard, tall and imposing in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, had his arms securely around Emily's waist. Her silver-threaded Oscar de la Renta gown seemed to capture the light of a dozen flashbulbs. They were by all accounts Manhattan's golden couple. Richard was the Lion of Wall Street, the CEO of the notoriously aggressive hedge fund Vance Capital. Emily was the philanthropic heart of the city, the beautiful, graceful wife who softened his predatory image. But a photograph only captures a fraction of a second. It didn't capture the 5 minutes before, when Richard had been impatiently checking his phone. His brow furrowed. It didn't capture the 10 minutes after, when he'd pulled her aside not to kiss her, but to whisper, "Did you have to invite the Goldbergs? You know I'm trying to oust him from the board." Their 20-year marriage hadn't soured. It had evaporated. The passion had given way to a comfortable, wealthy partnership. They were a brand. Emily lived in their sprawling Fifth Avenue penthouse, managed their homes in the Hamptons and St. Bart's, and raised millions for charities. Richard, in turn, conquered. The first crack in this gilded cage appeared not as a tremor, but as a person. Her name was Selina Reed. Richard had introduced her at a small, stuffy dinner for his top partners. "This is Sarah Reed," he'd announced, his voice holding a note of enthusiasm Emily hadn't heard in years. "She's our new head of strategic acquisitions. Brilliant. Came to us from Prometheus Strategic." Selina was everything Emily was not, where Emily was classic elegance and soft smiles. Selina was sharp edges and a predatory focus. She wore a severe blood-red dress that night, her black hair pulled into a tight, high ponytail. Her eyes, a startling shade of cobalt blue, scanned the room, as if calculating the value of everyone in it. She was perhaps 30, a good 2 decades younger than Emily and Richard. "Mrs. Vance," Selina had said, her handshake like a steel trap. "A pleasure. I've heard so much about your charity work." The last 2 words were delivered with a faint, almost imperceptible condescension, as if Emily's life was a hobby, a cute little pastime, while she was engaged in the real work. Emily, ever the diplomat, had smiled. "And I've heard you're the talk of the firm, Miss Reed. Welcome." Over the next 6 months, Selina's name became the new wallpaper of their lives. Richard, who once barely discussed his work, now spoke of her constantly. "Sarah closed the Tokyo deal. Sarah thinks we should short the euro. Sarah found the leak in the commodities division." Emily felt a prickle of a new, unfamiliar emotion. It wasn't just jealousy. It was irrelevance. She was the matriarch of a kingdom whose king had found a new, more exciting general. Richard began traveling more. Zurich, Hong Kong, Singapore. "Sarah's team is handling the logistics," he'd say. "It's too demanding for you to come along, Emily. All numbers. You'd be bored." Emily tried to bridge the gap. "Richard, the children's hospital benefit is next month. It's our table. You'll be there, won't you?" He'd waved her off, eyes on his tablet. "Can't. Sarah's set up a vital meeting in Dubai. We're restructuring the Sovereign Wealth Fund. It's important." The last time Emily saw her husband alive was on a Tuesday morning in late April. He was packing a duffel bag. "Catalina," he said curtly. "Just a quick overnight. Meeting with a tech billionaire on his yacht. Sarah's flying in from LA to join." "Richard," Emily said, standing in the doorway of his massive walk-in closet. "We haven't had dinner, just us, in 3 months." He stopped, looked at her, and his expression was one she'd never seen before, pity. "Emily, please, don't be needy. We're busy. I'm busy." He zipped the bag, pushed past her, and was gone. The call came 2 days later. The Coast Guard. There had been an accident. The 60-foot yacht, the Odyssey, had experienced a sudden explosion in the engine room. It had sunk in minutes. The billionaire, his 2 crew members, and Richard Vance were all missing, presumed dead. Emily collapsed. The world dissolved into a black, suffocating foghorn of grief sirens and the intrusive flashing of cameras. She was a widow. But as the initial shock subsided, a strange, cold detail emerged. The first person to call Emily, even before the Coast Guard had officially notified her, was not a friend or a partner from the firm. It was Selina Reed. "Emily, it's Sarah." The voice on the phone was strained, but not, Emily noted, hysterical. Not grieving. It was controlled. "I'm at the Marina del Rey station. I missed the boat. My flight was delayed. I'm so sorry. I can't believe he's gone." Emily Numb had just whispered, "Thank you for calling," and hung up. But one thought burrowed into her mind, cold and sharp. She missed the boat. How convenient. How utterly, terrifyingly convenient. The grief in Emily's heart didn't lessen, but it was suddenly joined by a new, chilling companion suspicion. The funeral was a grotesque spectacle. It was exactly what Richard would have wanted. Powerful, publicized, and packed with the most influential people in the world. Senators, bank CEOs, and rival billionaires filled the pews of St. Patrick's Cathedral, their solemn faces a mask for the networking that would undoubtedly happen at the wake. Emily sat in the front pew, a black veil obscuring her face. She was a statue of perfect aristocratic grief. Beside her, though not too close, sat Selina Reed. She too wore black, a chic, severe dress that was more power broker than mourner. She cried, but her dabs at her eyes with a lace handkerchief seemed performative. The press naturally was fascinated. The cameras flashed, capturing the 2 women, the wife and the protégé. The days that followed were a blur of condolences, casseroles from neighbors she barely knew, and the suffocating legal paperwork of death. Emily, fragile and disoriented, left most of it to the Vance family lawyers. Then came the reading of the will. It was held in the 80th floor conference room of Sullivan and Cromwell Richards' long-time legal firm. The room was dominated by a mahogany table so vast it felt like a different time zone from one end to the other. The lead attorney, a desiccated man named Marcus Peterson, cleared his throat. "We are here," Peterson droned, "to execute the last will and testament of Mr. Richard J. Vance." Emily was there. Richard's estranged, ne'er-do-well brother Daniel was there, likely hoping for a handout. 2 board members from Vance Capital were there. Selina Reed was not. Emily felt a small, guilty puff of relief. Peterson read through the preliminary bequests. A donation to his alma mater, Yale. A trust fund for his brother Daniel, so small it was a final insult. The St. Bart's villa to a distant cousin. And now, Peterson said, adjusting his glasses. "We come to the primary estate." He read the standard language of the original will drafted 15 years prior. The Fifth Avenue penthouse, the Hamptons estate in Sagaponack, the art collection, and most importantly, Richard's 65% controlling interest in Vance Capital, his entire legacy were all left unequivocally to my beloved wife, Emily Mayhew Vance. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "However," Peterson continued, his voice flat, "a codicil to this will was filed and executed 3 months ago." Emily's blood ran cold. She sat bolt upright. "This codicil dated February 14th of this year," Peterson said, shuffling a newer, crisper set of papers, "supersedes the primary bequest." He cleared his throat again, clearly uncomfortable. I quote, "My life has changed in ways I could not have foreseen. My partnership with Emily has been one of convenience for many years, a fact we both acknowledge. My true partner in business and in heart has become Selina Reed." Emily felt the room spin. The words hit her like physical blows. Peterson continued, "Therefore I hereby amend my will. To Emily I leave the Fifth Avenue penthouse, as she is fond of it, and a lifetime stipend of $1.5 million per year managed by the estate. This is more than generous." Generous. It was an allowance. "All remaining assets," Peterson read, his voice dropping, "including the entirety of my 65% controlling interest in Vance Capital, my property in Sagaponack, my private accounts in Zurich, and the entirety of my art collection, I bequeath to Ms. Selina Reed. She is also to be named my successor as CEO, effective immediately." Emily made no sound. She simply stood up her chair, scraping loudly on the marble floor. The board members were gaping. Richard's brother actually let out a low whistle. "Emily," Peterson started. Emily walked out of the room. She didn't run. She walked her spine rigid through the reception area into the elevator and out onto the street, where the sounds of Manhattan traffic felt like a personal assault. He hadn't just disinherited her. He had erased her. He had replaced her publicly and humiliatingly with a younger, sharper version. And he had labeled their entire life a convenience. That night, Emily did not cry. She sat in the dark in the penthouse he had so generously allowed her to keep, and let the grief finally curdle into a cold, hard rage. He had not only left her, he had tried to destroy her legacy. The next morning, she did not call Marcus Peterson. She did not call the New York Post, which was already running grainy photos of Richard and Selina in a car under the headline, "Vance's Vixen Gets the Vault." She made one call. She called Arthur Galloway. Galloway was not a society lawyer. His office was not on the 80th floor of a glass tower. It was in a pre-war building in the Flatiron district, filled with overflowing bookshelves and the smell of old paper and stronger coffee. Arthur Galloway himself was as unassuming as his office. He was in his late 50s, with a shock of grey hair, rumpled clothes, and the quiet, assessing eyes of a librarian. He wasn't a shark. He was a scholar. But where sharks attacked, Galloway dissected. He was known in very specific legal circles for finding the one tiny overlooked fact that could unravel an entire case. "Mrs. Vance, I'm sorry for your loss," he said, ushering her in. He didn't offer platitudes. Emily sat. "Mr. Galloway, I'm here because my husband's will is a lie. His death was convenient, and his mistress is about to take everything." Arthur Galloway poured her a cup of black coffee. He listened for an hour. He didn't all take a single note. He just watched her face, letting her pour out the entire story. The distance, the gala, Selina's introduction, the business trips, the missed boat, the reading of the will. When she was finished, drained and trembling, he leaned back in his creaking leather chair. "A will can be contested on several grounds," he said, his voice soft. "Lack of capacity, which is unlikely. Richard Vance was sharp as a tack. Or undue influence, coercion, fraud." "She did this," Emily whispered. "I know it, but I can't prove it. It's my word against that codicil." Galloway steepled his fingers. "Mrs. Vance, a person's life isn't just in a will. It's in their emails, their phone records, their credit card statements, their travel manifests. A person like Selina Reed, who appears this flawless in her execution, is often the most meticulous in covering her tracks." He paused, a flicker of something sharp in his quiet eyes. "And meticulous people are the ones who leave the most meticulous and most damning evidence. We're not just going to contest the will, Mrs. Vance. We are going to put Selina Reed's entire life on trial." Emily looked at this rumpled, quiet man. He was the first person in months who didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her like a partner. "Do it," she said. "The probate court of the state of New York is not a glamorous place. It lacks the dramatic grandeur of a criminal court. The rooms are smaller, the wood paneling is scuffed, and the air smells of stale coffee and bureaucratic anxiety. It is, however, where the bloodiest family battles are fought, not over guilt or innocence, but over money and memory." Emily Vance, represented by Arthur Galloway, was formally contesting the February 14th codicil on the grounds of fraud and undue influence. The courtroom was packed. The press was there, relegated to the back row, notebooks flipping open. The board of Vance Capital was there, their faces grim. Richard's brother Daniel was there, looking faintly amused by the chaos. And in the front row opposite Emily sat Selina Reed. She was no longer the protégée. She was the queen. She was flanked by a legal team from a high-powered, high-priced firm led by a lawyer named Marcus Thorne, a man known for his scorched-earth tactics and dazzling theatrical courtroom style. Selina herself was a vision of calculated mourning. She wore a bespoke black suit tailored to perfection. Her dark hair was styled in a sleek, powerful bob. Her makeup was subtle, flawless. Her cobalt eyes clear and focused. She looked every inch the successor, the new CEO, the woman in charge. Emily, by contrast, felt small. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her mother's pearls, and no veil. She looked like what she was, a widow betrayed and bewildered. Before the judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Eleanor Davies entered. The lawyers were at their respective tables organizing binders. The room was hushed. Emily couldn't help it. Her eyes drifted across the aisle. She met Selina's gaze. Selina didn't look away. She didn't flint. She held Emily's gaze for a long, agonizing moment. And then she did it. It wasn't a smile. A smile has warmth, or at least a full expression. This was a slow, deliberate lifting of one side of her mouth. A smirk. It was a smirk of such profound, poisonous confidence, a smirk of absolute victory, of pity, of dismissal, that it stole the air from Emily's lungs. It was a silent, brutal message. You lost. He's gone. It's all mine. You are nothing. Emily's hands trembled. She looked down, her face burning with a humiliation so deep it felt like a physical wound. Arthur Galloway leaned in, not looking at Selina, but at his own notes. "Let her," he murmured, so only Emily could hear. Pride is a heavy thing to carry, Mrs. Vance. It makes people clumsy. The hearing began. Marcus Thorne, Selina's lawyer, was first. He was a performance artist. He painted a picture of a love story for the ages. "Your Honor," he boomed, "this is not a case about money. It is a case about love. The tragic and sadly common story of a man who in his later years was trapped in a cold, loveless marriage of social obligation." He gestured to Emily, who flinched. "And then," Thorne continued, his voice softening, "he met Selina Reed, a woman who didn't just see him as a bank account, but as a mind, a partner, a man. They fell in love, Your Honor, and Richard Vance, in the full capacity of his brilliant mind, did what any man in love would do. He provided for the woman he intended to spend the rest of his life with." He called his first witness Selina Reed. She was, Emily had to admit, magnificent. She was the perfect witness, composed, intelligent, and radiating a quiet, tragic grief that seemed in this setting entirely authentic. Thorne led her through her story. "Ms. Reed, how did your relationship with Mr. Vance evolve?" Selina's voice was soft, but it carried. "It was unexpected. We bonded over work. The Zurich restructuring. He was brilliant, but he was also lonely. He told me he hadn't had a real conversation with his wife in a decade, that their life was a performance." "Objection," Galloway said calmly. "Hearsay." "Sustained," Judge Davies snapped. "Stick to your actions, Ms. Reed." Selina nodded, dabbing her eye. "Of course. Richard, Mr. Vance, and I began spending evenings in the Hong Kong office just talking about strategy, about life. He told me I was the only person who understood him." Thorne then produced the evidence. It was a devastating barrage. First the emails, dozens of them, not to her work address, but to a private Gmail account. They were from Richard's own private account. They were filled with intimate personal details. "Sarah, you were extraordinary today. I can't stop thinking about our dinner. Sarah, this deal is nothing without you. You are everything." Emily stared. It was his voice, his phrasing, then the photos. Thorne projected them for the court. Richard and Selina not in a boardroom, but at a table for two at what was clearly a Michelin star restaurant in Paris. Richard and Selina laughing on a ski lift, mountains rising behind them, captioned, "Aspen Surprise." Richard and Selina clinking champagne glasses on a balcony, the lights of the Hong Kong skyline glittering behind them. Emily felt sick. These were the trips, he'd said, were all numbers, the trips she'd be bored on. He had been living a complete, separate, happier life with this woman. Finally, Thorne produced his crown jewel. "Your Honor, we submit Exhibit D. A handwritten letter from Mr. Vance to my client dated February the 13th, the day before the codicil was signed." He handed the original to the judge and a copy to Galloway. It was projected on the screen. It was Richard's familiar, aggressive handwriting. "My dearest Sarah, tomorrow I fix the great mistake of my life. My marriage has been a shell for years. You are my true partner. The world will know it soon. All I have is yours, as my heart already is. All my love, R." It was a kill shot, a handwritten confession. Selina was weeping on the stand. "He gave it to me at dinner," she whispered. He said he was finally free." Marcus Thorne rested his case for the day. "The evidence is clear, Your Honor. This was Richard Vance's true final and undeniable wish. The court adjourned. Emily felt hollow. The board members were looking at Selina with a new respect. Even the judge seemed moved. Emily and Galloway were alone at their table. "Arthur," Emily's voice cracked. "Those photos, that letter, how do we fight that he loved her?" Arthur Galloway was slowly, methodically stacking his papers. He hadn't seemed rattled at all. In fact, he looked almost placid. "Mrs. Vance," he said, turning to her, "a photograph is a moment. An email is text. A letter is paper and ink. These are all things that can be manufactured." "But it looked so real," she insisted, desperate. "That's the point," Galloway said. "Ms. Reed is brilliant. She came from a firm called Prometheus Strategic. I looked them up. They are not acquisitions people. They are, for lack of a better term, corporate illusionists. They specialize in high-level industrial espionage reputation management and creating narratives." He tapped his briefcase. "Ms. Reed put on a very good show today. But the problem with a show is that it requires a script. And tomorrow we get to show the court just who wrote it." The next morning, the mood in the courtroom was different. The tension of the first day had been replaced by a sense of weary inevitability. The press in the back row were already drafting their stories. Wife's desperate last stand. How the Vance empire was won by love. Selina Reed's smirk from the day before had settled into an expression of calm, magnanimous authority. She was already the CEO. Arthur Galloway called his first witness. "The plaintiff calls Emily Vance." Emily's walk to the witness stand was the longest of her life. Every eye was on her. She felt the heavy, pitying gaze of her friends in the gallery and the cold, analytical stare of Selina. She sat her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles were white. Galloway's direct examination was gentle, designed to build a counter-narrative. He established their history, the 20 years of marriage, her role in the company's early days, hosting investors, vetting partners, building the social capital that Richard later leveraged. "Mrs. Vance, in the last year of his life, did you and your husband have disagreements?" "Yes," Emily said, her voice clear. "We disagreed about the direction of the firm. It had become ruthless. Richard was obsessed with growth at any cost. I felt he was losing his way. We argued about it." "So you were not estranged?" "We were struggling," Emily said honestly, "but we were not estranged. We were still a family. I still loved him. And this codicil dated February 14th. Were you aware of it?" "No," Emily said. "Absolutely not. The last I knew, our wills were as they had always been, mirror images. Everything to each other." Galloway nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance. No further questions." He sat down. Emily felt a small, steadying surge of confidence. She had told her truth. Then Marcus Thorne stood up. He sauntered to the lectern, shuffling his papers with a dramatic flourish. He smiled at her, a predatory baring of teeth. "Good morning, Mrs. Vance. Or perhaps not so good." "Objection," Galloway said without even looking up. "Sustained. Get on with it, Mr. Thorne," the judge said, already annoyed. "Mrs. Vance," Thorne began, "you testified that you loved your husband, and yet you disagreed with his life's work. The very work that provides for your everything. Isn't that right?" "I disagreed with his methods, not his success." "Ah, his methods. You mean his brilliance, his drive, the things that, according to Ms. Reed, you had long since stopped appreciating." Objection. Hearsay, Galloway said. Sustained. Mr. Thorne, I will not warn you again. Thorne pivoted. Let's talk about that family. Mrs. Vance, when was the last time you and your husband shared a bedroom? Emily froze. The question was a brutal, intimate violation. I don't see how that's relevant. It's entirely relevant. Your Honor, it speaks to the loving marriage the plaintiff is trying to sell. Judge Davies sighed. Answer the question, Mrs. Vance. Emily's face flushed. It had been some time. About a year. The penthouse is large. We had separate suites. A murmur went through the courtroom. Thorne smiled. Separate suites. A struggle. You disagreed with his work. Mrs. Vance, what was the last book your husband read? Emily was blindsided. I don't recall. You don't recall. But Ms. Reed knew. She testified yesterday in a deposition that it was The Anarchy by William Dalrymple. She bought it for him. Because they talked, Mrs. Vance, about things other than charity galas. We were busy. Exactly, Thorne shouted, slamming his hand on the lectern. He was busy building an empire, and you were busy. Being busy. Isn't it true, Mrs. Vance, that you hadn't joined him on an international business trip in over 2 years? He told me not to. Emily said, her voice small. He said I'd be bored. He said you'd be bored. Or was it that he was bored? Bored of a wife who wasn't his partner. Bored of a woman who, by her own admission, lived in a separate suite. A woman who didn't even know what book he was reading. Thorne advanced on the witness box. Mrs. Vance isn't the real truth here. Not fraud, not undue influence, but simple, profound humiliation. Isn't it true that your husband fell in love with another woman? A more present woman, a more intelligent woman, and you simply can't stand it? Isn't this entire lawsuit just one last desperate attempt to claw back a man who had already in every way that mattered left you? Tears were streaming down Emily's face. She was exposed, gutted, and utterly humiliated. The image of the cold absentee wife was being painted in indelible ink. No, that's not... That's all, Your Honor, Thorne said, turning his back on her in disgust. Emily stumbled back to her seat, her composure shattered. She felt the case her life, her entire history, slipping away. Selina Reed was watching her, that same cold, analytical expression on her face. The smirk was gone, replaced by something worse, boredom, as if the fight was already over. Arthur, Emily whispered, trembling as the court took a brief recess. He destroyed me. He's right. They loved each other. We've lost. Arthur Galloway poured her a glass of water. His hand was perfectly steady. He didn't look angry. He didn't look defeated. No, Mrs. Vance, he said quietly. He didn't destroy you. He just overplayed his hand. What are you talking about? Mr. Thorne's entire argument, Galloway said, rests on the premise that Selina Reed is a brilliant, devoted, and intimate partner. She is the photos, the letter. Exactly. Galloway said, a thin, almost invisible smile playing on his own lips. He's spent all his time proving how smart she is, how meticulous she is, how involved she was in every aspect of Richard's life. He leaned in. He has, in effect, established her as a genius. He has unwittingly just set the stage for my entire case. Because a genius, A meticulous genius shouldn't make stupid mistakes, and Mrs. Vance, Ms. Reed, has made one of the most colossal and arrogant mistakes I have ever seen." When the recess ended, the energy in the room had shifted. Emily's disastrous testimony hung in the air, a fog of defeat. Marcus Thorne looked smug, scrolling through his phone. Selina Reed was whispering with her legal team, already looking like she was discussing Q3 projections rather than a probate hearing. "Mr. Galloway," Judge Davies said, "you may call your next witness." "Thank you, Your Honor," Galloway said, rising. "The plaintiff would like to recall Ms. Selina Reed to the stand." A jolt went through the courtroom. Thorne shot to his feet. "Objection! She has already testified." "She testified on direct, Mr. Thorne," Galloway said calmly. "I have not yet had the privilege of cross-examination." "Proceed, Mr. Galloway," the judge said, leaning forward, suddenly interested. Selina's composure didn't falter, but as she walked back to the stand, her cobalt eyes were fixed on Galloway. The boredom was gone. She was assessing a threat. "Ms. Reed," Galloway began, his voice still gentle, almost academic. "You've been painted by your own attorney as a woman of extraordinary intelligence. Yale summa cum laude, Stanford MBA, a rising star at Prometheus Strategic, and then a meteoric rise at Vance Capital. Is that an accurate description?" Selina gave a modest shrug. "I work hard, Mr. Galloway." "Indeed, and you're a planner. You testified that you and Mr. Vance planned a future together. You planned business deals, you planned trips." "Yes, we were partners in everything." "A meticulous planner," Galloway repeated, as if tasting the words. "Let's talk about one of those plans. The trip to Aspen, the one in the photograph." He projected the photo again, Selina and Richard bundled in ski gear, laughing on a ski lift. "That was a wonderful surprise weekend," Selina said, smiling at the memory. "February, just after we closed the Zurich deal." "Specifically," Galloway said, consulting his notes. "It was the weekend of February 9th, correct?" Yes, I believe so." "You flew from JFK to Aspen-Pitkin County Airport. You checked into the Little Nell. You rented skis from Four Mountain Sports. You had dinner at Matsuhisa. You're very precise." Selina's smile tightened. "It was a memorable trip." "I'm sure it was," Galloway said. He held up a document. "This is a folio from the Little Nell for the presidential suite for that weekend, billed to Mr. Vance's corporate card. It lists 2 guests, Richard Vance and Selina Reed. It all looks perfect." "It was," Selina said. "Except," Galloway said, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly, "I also have the flight manifest from American Airlines Flight 174 JFK to LAX on that same day, February 9th. And a credit card receipt from the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles. For you, Ms. Reed. For the entire weekend." The courtroom went silent. Selina's face paled just slightly. That's a mistake," she stammered. "Is it?" Galloway said. "Or is it that you, a meticulous planner, created a fake hotel folio, but forgot to cover your real travel? You weren't in Aspen with him, were you, Ms. Reed? You were in Los Angeles. Alone." We met up later," she said, her voice losing its silky confidence. "But the photo," Galloway pressed, "it's so intimate. How could you be on a ski lift in Aspen when you were dining in West Hollywood? It must have been a different weekend. You're trying to confuse me." "Am I?" Galloway moved on. Let's talk about that love letter. He projected the letter again. My dearest Sarah. A beautiful letter, Galloway said. Emotional, powerful. And you testified he gave it to you on February 13th, the night before he signed the codicil. He did, Selina said, her voice defiant. It's his handwriting. Absolutely. I know his hand. I'm sure you do, Galloway said. You must have studied it for hours. Objection, Thorne roared. Insinuation. Sustained. Rephrase, Mr. Galloway. My apologies, Your Honor. Ms. Reed, you came to Vance Capital from a firm called Prometheus Strategic. Can you for the court describe exactly what Prometheus does? I've told you. Strategic acquisitions. Consulting. That's a very vague term, Galloway said. I spoke with their founder, a Mr. Damien Cross. He was more specific. He described his firm as artists of the narrative. He said they specialize in deep-cover corporate infiltration, psychological profiling, and asset persuasion. That sounds less like consulting Ms. Reed and more like espionage. Selina was white as a sheet now. I'm not... That's a gross mischaracterization. Is it Mr. Cross was also very clear that a key part of their service is, and I quote, forensic-level document creation, forgeries, creating illusions, to convince a target of a specific narrative. Galloway walked closer to the witness box. That letter, Ms. Reed, you said he gave it to you. But I have to wonder, did you give it to him? Did you, or an associate from Prometheus, create this letter? This perfect, damning letter to seal your claim? No, she cried. That is an outrageous lie. He loved me. He wrote that for me. Then you won't mind, Galloway said, if I call my next witness. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Dr. Evelyn Hayes. Thorne and his team were frantically whispering. Selina Reed looked at the back of the courtroom, and for the first time Emily saw it. Pure, unadulterated terror. A woman in her late 60s with a severe grey bun, thick glasses, and a no-nonsense tweed suit walked to the front of the courtroom. She moved with an academic's deliberate, unhurried pace. She was sworn in her voice, crisp and clear. Please state your name and occupation for the record. Dr. Evelyn Hayes. I am a board-certified forensic document examiner and digital forensics expert. I am a principal at Coda Forensics. Galloway began. Dr. Hayes, were you retained by my office to examine several items related to this case? I was. Dr. Hayes said, her eyes scanning the room. And what did you examine? I was given the original handwritten letter, marked as Exhibit D. I was also given access via a court-ordered subpoena to the electronic devices of Ms. Selina Reed, including her personal laptop and mobile phone, as well as the servers from Prometheus Strategic. Marcus Thorne was on his feet. Your Honor, this is a fishing expedition. This evidence was obtained under a false pretense. It was obtained, Galloway countered, with a subpoena signed by this very court based on preliminary findings of financial irregularities. It is valid. Sit down, Mr. Thorne, Judge Davies ordered. Continue, Mr. Galloway. Galloway turned back to the witness. Dr. Hayes. Let's start with the letter. Exhibit D. The one Ms. Reed claims Richard Vance wrote to her. What did you find? Dr. Hayes put on her glasses and referred to her notes. The letter at first glance appears to be in Mr. Vance's handwriting. The loops, the slant, the signature. They are all a near-perfect match for his known samples. Selina Reed let out a small, audible sigh of relief. However, Dr. Hayes continued, a near-perfect match is in itself a significant red flag. Human handwriting is naturally variable. This was too perfect. The pressure on the downstrokes, particularly on the R and V, was unnaturally consistent to a micron level of precision. Galloway. And what does that consistency tell you? It tells me this was not written by a human hand, Dr. Hayes said flatly. It was produced by a machine, specifically a high-end autopen plotter, a Model 12 often used for signing checks or celebrity memorabilia. It replicates a scanned signature perfectly, but in this case it was used to replicate an entire letter. The courtroom exploded in murmurs. The judge banged her gavel. Silence! But the handwriting, Thorne stammered. It is his. The style is his, Dr. Hayes corrected. Our analysis of Ms. Reed's laptop found several high-resolution scans of Mr. Vance's personal notes. These were used as the source file. The autopen simply copied them. It is, in effect, a high-tech robotic forgery. Selina was shaking her head, whispering, "No, no, no." "But that is not, Doctor," Hayes said, "the most compelling piece of evidence." She signaled for a projection. "The ink, Your Honor. The ink is the true giveaway. We ran a chemical analysis. The ink in that letter is a highly specific proprietary blend Japanese ink. It's known as F3 chromatic black." "And what is significant about this ink?" Galloway asked. "Its release date," Dr. Hayes said. "This specific ink blend, favored by high-end forgers for its resistance to waging analysis, was not commercially available anywhere in the world until March 1st of this year." Galloway let the silence hang. Emily felt her heart stop. "Your Honor," Galloway said, his voice ringing with quiet thunder. "This letter which Miss Reed swears Richard Vance gave her on February 13th was written with ink that did not exist until 2 weeks after she claims she received it." Selina Reed let out a small, choked sound. "It is," Dr. Hayes concluded, "a physical and chronological impossibility." The room was in stunned silence. Judge Davies was staring at Selina, her face a mask of cold fury. "But we are not finished," Galloway said. "Dr. Hayes, you also examined Ms. Reed's digital files. What about the photographs?" "The photographs," Dr. Hayes said, "were also problematic. Let's look at the Aspen photo again." The image of Richard and Selina on the ski lift returned to the screen. "This," Dr. Hayes said, "is a composite, a digital forgery." She then showed the court 2 other images found in a drafts folder on Selina's laptop. One was the original time-stamped photo of Richard Vance on the ski lift, completely alone. He looked tired, not happy. The other was a photo of Selina taken against a green screen in a winter jacket. Using metadata analysis, Dr. Hayes explained, we can see the exact layering process. Ms. Reed was digitally inserted into the photo. The lighting was adjusted, the shadows deepened. It's an expert job. The kind a narrative artist from Prometheus Strategic would be trained to do. The same process was used for the Paris restaurant photo and the Hong Kong balcony photo. All of them are fakes. The foundation of Selina's case wasn't just cracking. It was disintegrating into dust. She was hyperventilating, her eyes wide with panic, staring at her lawyer, who looked just as stunned. And finally, Dr. Hayes, Galloway said, his voice dropping, "Did you find any other relevant documents?" "I did," she said, "in a password-protected, triple-encrypted container file. It took my team 72 hours to crack. It was a file from the Prometheus Strategic servers shared with Ms. Reed's personal email. It was in effect a business plan." "What was the title of this plan?" It was titled Project Vulture. Dr. Hayes projected the cover page. It was she explained, a full-scale prospectus for a long-con operation. It identified Richard Vance as a high-value target, and it detailed a multi-phase plan. She began to read from it. Phase 1. Infiltration. Place operative Ms. Reed inside Vance Capital to gain proximity. Phase 2. Romantic compromise. Exploit target's known marital dissatisfaction to create an emotional and physical dependency. Phase 3. Asset isolation. Systematically alienate target from his spouse and business partners. Phase 4. Control. Persuade target to alter his will and grant operative full control. Phase 5. Dr. Hayes paused, looking at the judge. Phase 5 was titled Asset Liquidation and Exit. This document, Dr. Hayes said, is a step-by-step blueprint for exactly what Ms. Reed did. It outlines the creation of a false narrative of love, the systematic forging of documents to support it, and the ultimate goal of seizing control of Vance Capital, liquidating its assets, and transferring the funds to an offshore entity. Galloway turned not to the witness, but to Selina Reed. It wasn't a love story, was it, Ms. Reed? He said, his voice cutting through the silent room. It was an infiltration. It was a con. It was a corporate heist, disguised as a romance. You didn't love him. You targeted him. Selina's face, which had been white with terror, suddenly flushed a deep, mottled red. The mask of the grieving partner and the sharp CEO shattered, revealing the cornered, rabid animal beneath. "He wanted me," she shrieked, rising from her chair. "He was tired of her. That old boring cow. He hated her. I gave him a life. I deserved it. I worked for it. I earned it." It was a full, screaming confession. Marcus Thorne was grabbing her arm. "Sarah, no. Stop." But Galloway wasn't done. He held up one last hand. "Your Honor," he said, "Dr. Hayes found one more thing, didn't she?" Dr. Hayes looked grim. "Yes. In the financial records attached to Project Vulture, we found a payment, a wire transfer of $200,000 sent from an untraceable account linked to Prometheus, to a boat mechanic in Catalina, California. The payment was made 2 days before the Odyssey exploded." Emily Vance gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "It wasn't just fraud," Galloway said, his voice shaking with cold rage. "It wasn't just a heist. You couldn't wait for him to die, could you? You had the will. You just had to make sure you could execute it. You killed him." The courtroom doors burst open. This time it wasn't the press. It was 2 NYPD detectives and several armed court officers. Selina Reed looked from the detectives to Galloway to Emily. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You," she spat at Emily. "You were nothing. I had everything." "No," Emily said, her voice quiet, but stronger than it had ever been. "You had a lie. I have the truth." The smirk was gone. Forever. As the detectives snapped the handcuffs on her wrists, Selina Reed's beautiful, composed face finally crumpled. She was just a common, defeated criminal. She was at last destroyed. The aftermath was a maelstrom. The probate hearing was immediately suspended, and the case was handed over to the district attorney's office. The courtroom, which had been the theater for a family drama, was now a crime scene. Selina Reed was charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, conspiracy forgery, and most chillingly, first-degree murder. The boat mechanic, a man named James Prentice, had been apprehended trying to board a flight to Mexico and had already given a full deposition in exchange for a plea deal. He confirmed he was paid to plant a pierced explosive device near the fuel line set to detonate when the yacht was miles offshore. Selina's delayed flight was, as Emily had suspected, a cold, calculated alibi. Marcus Thorne, Selina's lawyer, looked shell-shocked. He claimed to have no knowledge of his client's criminal activities, but his reputation was in tatters. The firm, Prometheus Strategic, was raided by the FBI. Its founder, Damien Cross, was also indicted as a co-conspirator. Project Vulture was their masterpiece, and it had led to their annihilation. For Emily, the world had been reformed. The man she was grieving, the cold, distant husband who had betrayed her, was a victim. He hadn't left her. He had been stolen from her. The probate court reconvened 2 weeks later. It was a formality. Judge Davies, her face carved from stone, issued her ruling in under 5 minutes. Based on the overwhelming and frankly horrifying evidence of criminal fraud, conspiracy, and murder, she declared the codicil dated February 14th is ruled unequivocally invalid, the product of extreme undue influence and criminal malfeasance. This court orders the original will of Richard J. Vance reinstated in its entirety. She looked directly at Emily, her expression softening for the first time. Mrs. Vance, the estate is yours. My deepest, deepest condolences for what you have endured. Emily simply nodded, tears of a different kind, tears of shock, of validation, of a profound and terrible vindication streaming down her face. Arthur Galloway placed a steadying hand on her arm. The legal victory was absolute, but the personal victory was far more complex. Emily Vance was now one of the wealthiest women in the world. She was the sole owner of Vance Capital. The first few weeks were a blur of meetings with the horrified and now deeply respectful board members. They had expected the society wife to simply liquidate the company and retreat to her penthouse. They too had underestimated her. Emily did not liquidate. She remade. She walked into Richard's cavernous office, the office he had shared with Selina, the one he had died to protect, and she began to work. She fired the entire strategic acquisitions team, the Vipers Selina had installed. She promoted 2 long-serving partners, a man and a woman, who had often clashed with Richard's aggressive later-life tactics. She met with Arthur Galloway in her office, now redecorated, the heavy mahogany and leather replaced with light colours and clean lines. "You saved me, Arthur," she said, handing him a check. This isn't enough." Galloway looked at the check. It was for a staggering amount, enough to retire on. He pushed it gently back across the desk. "Mrs. Vance, your husband's corporate insurance, which you now control, covered my fees and a handsome bonus. I am well compensated." "But what you did—" "I did my job," he said, his quiet eyes holding hers. "I find truths. The truth was on your side. I just had to excavate it. Ms. Reed was so arrogant she kept her receipts." He paused. "The real question, Emily, is what you will do now." Emily looked out the window over the vast expanse of Central Park. "When I testified," she said, "Mr. Thorne accused me of disagreeing with my husband's work. He was right. I did. I hated what this firm had become. It was a vulture, just as Selina's project named it." She turned back to him. "Richard wasn't always like that. The man I married, he wanted to build things, not just break them. Selina preyed on the worst parts of him, the greed, the ego. She amplified it, used it, and then killed him for it. So," she said, standing tall, "I'm not going to run from it. I'm going to fix it." 6 months later, the Wall Street Journal ran a new profile. The Vance Metamorphosis: How Emily Vance Turned a Hedge Fund into an Ethical Powerhouse. Emily had restructured the entire company. She'd created the Vance Foundation for Ethical Business, using the firm's massive profits to fund sustainable startups and non-profit oversight groups. She didn't just run the company, she led it. She had found in the ashes of her husband's death and a monstrous betrayal the strength she never knew she possessed. She never sold the penthouse. One evening she was cleaning out Richard's old study, a room she hadn't entered since his death. In the back of his desk, tucked beneath old tax returns, she found a small, worn leather box. Inside it was not a document. It was not a stock certificate. It was the program from the 1998 Metropolitan Museum of Art Gala, the first one she had ever chaired. And on the back, in Richard's familiar aggressive script, was a note she'd never seen. Ella watched you on stage tonight. You were a queen. I am the luckiest man in the world. Ah. It was dated 20 years before his death. Before Selina. Before the convenience. Emily held the small program to her chest, and for the first time since the hearing, she cried. She cried for the man she had married, not the man who had died. She had lost her husband twice, once to his own ambition, and a second time to a murderer's. But in the end, she had inherited more than just his money. She had inherited his power, and unlike him, she knew exactly what to do with it. The smirk in the courtroom had been an attempt to end her story, but instead it had been the beginning of it. Selina Reed thought one smirk could end it all. She underestimated the truth. She underestimated the law. And she vastly underestimated the quiet dignity of a wife betrayed. The truth always has a way of finding the light, even if it has to come from a forensic analysis of a drop of ink. If you were captivated by this story of justice, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who loves a story where the wicked finally get what they deserve. And please subscribe to our channel for more true-life dramas and incredible stories of justice served. What did you think of Arthur Galloway's final move? Let us know in the comments below.